My name is David Otto. I am a counter-terrorism expert based in the UK. My area of expertise is to do with countering terrorism from the African heritage perspective. The reason why I say that is because, you know, as an African, we're trying to make sure that we represent our people, we represent our unique problems. So my organization that I work for, TGS Intelligence Consultants, we focus on answering problems for African governments. So I'm very, very pleased to be in this program of today, which has been organized by Professor Alan. And I'm also very pleased to be among Sudanese. I mean, the most interesting thing is the topic I'm going to be talking about today to do with the diaspora, and more importantly, to do with the issue of from passive to active. How are diasporans, how have they changed in terms of security? Last week I was doing a presentation and I was talking about the issue of the insecurity that we all experience today. And for the past 3 days, I think we've had a series of attacks, you know, not just in Germany. I had a call this morning that there was an attack that was ongoing in California. Another attack, you know, took place in Iraq this morning. So I think, you know, we are having serious issues, especially with diasporans. Whether you're talking about individuals or you're talking about the host country or we're talking about the home country. But more precisely, in the case of, I'm going to start my presentation very soon, but I'm just going to give a bit of an outview in terms of the issue of Sudan. Because Sudan plays a very, very important role if we're talking about the current situation with security. And I think a lot of you would be much more aware of that. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, in the early 1990s, Osama bin Laden was said to have been in Sudan for about 5 years. And bin Laden had invested, you know, in Sudan, and there was an issue with the fact that, you know, Sudan was one of those countries that was called as a sponsor of terrorist organizations, state sponsor of terrorist organizations, which is very important. And the reason why that is important is because, you know, a couple of years after that was in 1998, there was a US strike in Khartoum, which actually destroyed a pharmaceutical company. And the basis of that was that there was collection of, there was gathering of evidence based on some soil samples that were collected out of the pharmaceutical company. So this has brought the issue of Sudan to the limelight. And all that has happened, you know, since the Osama bin Laden left Sudan, he then went to Afghanistan. So there has been this role that Sudan has always played, you know, in the minds of historians about, you know, what is happening in our current days when we talk about Al-Qaeda, or we're talking about the current situation in ISIL. The African diasporans are very important, you know, especially when you look at the issue of terrorism and the issue of radicalization. In the early times, when you had first diasporans who came to Europe, who came to different countries, I think the focus was on nationalism. The focus was on, you know, a lot of Africans who were based in diaspora were supporting their countries back home, but this was based on nationalism. I think I do remember when I was doing a project in Sri Lanka with the Tamil Tigers. You remember that, you know, they had a huge Tamil population that was supporting the Tamil Tigers at the time. This was seen by Western nations as something that, you know, really touched them, you know, because for them, you know, it was you know, people in the diaspora supporting their brothers back home. So this was not seen as a big problem. We also had the same issue with Northern Ireland, where a lot of Irish Americans were supporting their brethren, back home. But also, the West also saw this as, something that was not taking place in their soil. In Africa as well, we've seen this with groups like the Biafra movement. The Biafra movement has a lot of support from the diaspora. But then again, in the current atmosphere, nobody takes it serious because I think everyone is thinking, well, this is something which is only happening in Nigeria, so it doesn't concern us. But now, the situation is very different. The issue of motivation, capability and opportunity is very important. And I always mention this whenever I'm talking about security and terrorism, because I say to people, these three components are very important. Motivation talks about the reasons why people get engaged, or the reasons why diasporans get engaged in terrorism. The capability talks about how diasporans manage to get, the resources to support, terrorist organizations. And the opportunity talks about, the various kinds of opportunities that are being provided to them back home. So for instance, if I'm talking about opportunity, I'm talking about instability is one of those opportunities that gives diasporans the edge to be able to contribute negatively back home. So these three areas are very important. And when we'll be talking about the solution aspect of what is happening, then you have to look at the three areas from a separate perspective. So if you want to deal with the motivation, then you have programs that you need to deal with the motivation. But then if you want to deal with the capability, then you have to be looking at arms industries, who supply weapons and stuff like that. And if you look at the opportunity, this is where the security architecture comes in. But what we see at the moment is that, there is a lot more focus on the opportunity theory. So governments are a lot more working towards, how do we stop them from attacking at home? How do we stop them from attacking abroad? But there is very, very little work that is being done in actually looking at the motivation. So in other words, I always say to people, we're trying to treat the cause, but we are not actually treating the disease itself. I did say something about 3 years ago. I was invited by the Metropolitan Police to talk about the role that Africans, are playing in the diaspora, not just here, but in Africans back home. And one of the things which I said to them was, after traveling to the Lake Chad region, I did make it very clear that groups like Boko Haram are the groups that are laying the golden eggs for ISIL. Because what is happening is, there is a very increased vulnerability in these African countries, including Sudan, including South Sudan, where I've been to as well, Nigeria, Cameroon. When you go to all these areas, you can see how much vulnerability has been created by these organizations, which now allows for young diasporans to be able to travel from maybe from the UK or anywhere in the world, to go to Nigeria. But I think the primary focus of the security services here in the UK and elsewhere in Europe has been on looking at the Middle Eastern route, looking at what's happening in Syria, what is happening in possibly Iraq and Iran. But they have failed to look at what is happening in different countries, i.e. what is happening in South Sudan at the moment, what is happening in Nigeria, what is happening in Chad. So all these routes, have been neglected. But then the danger of neglecting these routes is you have young diasporans who are living here to go to these areas via Africa, to engage in what we could call the foreign fighter trend. So talking about the ISIL, Boko Haram links, and talking about the Al-Shabaab Akim link, I always make it clear that when you look at what is happening in practice, there is no difference between Al-Qaeda and ISIL. These organizations are so clever in such a way that they've made the security services to feel that there is a difference, but there is no difference between Al-Qaeda and ISIL because the group ISIL, as we all know, came from the Al-Nusra, which is the Al-Qaeda branch in Iraq at the time. But what we tend to believe is that, Al-Qaeda is different and ISIL is different. And I keep saying to people that, they have the same ideology. They may have a difference in terms of Al-Qaeda saying ISIL is too violent, but I always laugh when they say that because, Al-Qaeda saying ISIL is violent. So that's very interesting, but that is the only difference that people talk about when they talk about the relationship between ISIL and Al-Qaeda. But the reason why I think that is important to mention is because, there is a very close collaboration between groups like ISIL and Al-Qaeda. There's close collaboration between Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. I think a lot of you remember that when Boko Haram came into force, they actually signed, they paid allegiance to Al-Qaeda. And then when ISIL also came, they also had allegiance with ISIL. Al-Shabaab has done the same. They have some factions who have officially paid allegiance to Al-Qaeda, and they also have some factions which have paid allegiance to ISIL. So what this tells us is very important, is that in order for us to be able to counter all these terrorist organizations, we also have to be collaborative. We have to work as one. Russia should not be on his side, the West on his side. So I think these groups take advantage of the fact that, not just the big powers are divided, but countries like, for instance, Sudan, will not want to collaborate very much with South Sudan, or Cameroon will not want to collaborate with Nigeria. So all these differences are exploited by these organizations. But, it's important for us to know that we have to work as one. This is just a map of the Global Terrorism Index, and I just put there the most affected countries, and I named them there. I believe that when we talk about issues of security today, I think a lot of our academic colleagues, like to mention numbers. But when it comes to the effects of what is being done, I think numbers is not the most important factor. Because, most of the attacks which are being carried out today are done by lone wolves. So these are individuals who sit in their homes and plan these attacks very, very meticulously. So I think numbers is not important at the moment. What is important is going back to look at the motivation of what actually drives diaspora individuals to become homegrown terrorists and foreign fighters. I did mention something about the process of radicalization, and this is important because as diasporans, we have family members, and one of the most important things that we want to do is to ensure that our family members are safe, to ensure that whatever they're doing, we have an idea of whether they're becoming members of these terrorist organizations. But in order for us to be able to have an understanding, we have to understand the steps and the various stages. And I did mention about the normal stage. And the normal stage is essentially saying, you cannot go from 2 to 1. You have to start from 1. And considering the fact that we all consider ourselves as normal, then what actually drives us to become vulnerable? These are some of the issues that I'm going to talk about very, very shortly in terms of the factors that drives the diasporans to become foreign fighters and homegrown terrorists. The second stage is the stage of the radicalization process. A lot of the time you have the media talking about radicalization as if radicalization means violent extremism. Radicalization simply means the process that people go through in order to become either extreme or violently extreme. So radicalization is simply that stage of moving from one area of thought to another area of thought. And in order for you to be able to devise a program against radicalization, you have to take into consideration the vulnerabilities that that individual faces or group. Then the next stage is what we call the cognitive extremism. So once you've been radicalized, the purpose of that radicalization is to develop an extreme mind. But then that extreme mind we call it cognitive extremism, because then I can say I don't like straight people, or I don't like gays, or I don't like white people, or I don't like black people. That is just cognitive extremism. So it makes you to have this parallel of them and us. So you develop the idea of they are different from us, I am different from them, therefore, I don't like them. But that stage is still not a bad stage, because I'm sure that each and every one of us in here has some kind of an extreme idea of what they don't like or what they like. But that does not necessarily mean that we're going to move to the next stage, which is violent extremism. So that stage is the most important stage that we talk about, violent extremism, where you acquire the capability. So you remember I talked about the motivation and I talked about the capability. So when you get to the stage of violent extremism, that is when the individual goes out to acquire the capability, or whether it's a gun, or it's a bomb or an ID or whatever, that is the stage where we should be a lot more concerned about, acquiring that capability. And then we talk about the radical preachers, which we talk about counter-narratives. What kind of ideology, do these young people have, or how are they being pulled to become violently extreme? And who are these radical preachers? So we always say that, it goes through what I call the process of osmosis. And I call it the process of osmosis because I keep saying to people that, there is a stronger solution, there is a stronger ideology that pulls a weaker one through some certain factors. So I call that process osmosis, where you have some radical preachers who find somebody who is vulnerable, who is young, and then, pulls them through a process of osmosis. But then how do you solve that? You have to look for counter-narratives. But at the moment, I don't think we do have any counter-narratives to go with. So I've talked about the process, but this is very particular to the diaspora, and I use the word the passive and the reaction and active. And what I meant by that was, the contribution that diasporans do in the community in terms of, how they react to security. And I did say before that, with the first generation and the second generation, they were very, very passive about the way that they viewed security issues. So they were more concerned about helping their countries back home to succeed to get independence. They were more concerned about sponsoring the organizations back home. But the reaction, which talks about the issue of maybe foreign policy or the way that diasporans have been treated in their communities, have now led them to be more active in terms of the way they get involved in terrorism. So if you look at the trend of the countries which have been affected in Europe, 99% of the people who are accused are either people who were born here or people who traveled here as immigrants or migrants. So that shows you that there has been an increase now from being passive as a result of the reactions of the host countries, or as a result of the situation of the countries back home, to now making more diasporans to be active. But then to look at that, you have three roles. You have the individual. So the individual who comes here, you have to take into consideration his personal circumstances. So his personal circumstances could lead him to become an active diasporan in terms of radicalization. Then the meso level, which is the enabling environment, which I spoke about. So for instance, if you're talking about the Sudanese case, where you have South Sudan, just had its independence, one of the newest countries in the world. How many diasporans were prepared to go there to fight for the South Sudanese army because of the SPLM, because of the situation that we're facing? So the situation back home, another good case we've talked about is Nigeria. Another case is Syria and Iraq. These are all the enabling environments. So for instance, if the West goes and bombs Iraq, you don't expect that, the diasporans who see that as a wrong foreign policy will not get involved. So that enabling environment is very important. Then the host country as well. How do you treat diasporans? I've listened today, a lot of you talk about, the fact that diasporans, some of them sit on the fence. Young people don't know where they belong. They feel discriminated. Some of them feel bullied. They do not accept the culture, or the culture doesn't accept them in their host country. And then back home, they are also not accepted. So that is very, very important in terms of, the host country. And then the home country as well is important in the kind of governments that maybe the Western nations want to set up. So if you look at the situation that's happening in Iraq, since the invasion of Iraq in 2003, Iraq has been worse. Since the crisis in Syria has been worse. Since the crisis in Libya, it's going worse. So all those elements in the home country encourage diasporans to decide to become foreign fighters and homegrown terrorists. So as I did mention, these are some of the factors which I talked about identity crisis, discrimination, failure to integrate young people within the community, so you alienate them. And then the social media is very important. I was having a conversation just with a colleague, and I said, the social media plays a very powerful role. If you have the social media with you, you have the control. So the way that the Western foreign policy is portrayed, a lot of people are now becoming very, very savvy. And today you can Google anything, you're going to find it. So people are now using the social media to understand the truth. So it is not only what the government tells you, it is what you yourself can find.
And most of the young diasporans, as you rightly mentioned, you know, they're very, very educated. So they go online and they find out about these things themselves, and they see where the injustice is within their countries and within their host countries, and they decide to become foreign fighters. So I talked about the foreign policy. Geopolitics is very important as well. Colonialism, these are all factors which, you know, a lot of foreign fighters have used in terms of, we believe that, you know, we've been treated by the Western nations, or our countries have been made unstable just because, you know, we want the West to be more stable. So those are some of the factors. And then I spoke about events at home, wars, civil wars. These are all factors that push young diasporans, you know, to become engaged in foreign fighting. So I spoke about identity integration, and it is not only the diasporans. You know, you have even individuals who are born here who have nothing to do, like Samantha Litwaith. She decided to become, she's one of the top leaders of Al-Shabaab. But, you know, why did she go there? She went there because of the identity crisis, which she believed, you know, she had a relationship with the diasporan, and she became involved in this, and they call her the Black Widow. So it's important for us to understand that, you know, the integration of the identity does not only end with the diasporans. Sometimes that hatred passes on to the host country members, and they now become foreign fighters as well. And this issue of geopolitics, as I said, you know, is very important. This is a young man who actually, he's called the American Pant Bomber, who attempted to bomb the airline. It's important, you know. He was attending a seminar in London, just a protest in London, and he was saying that stop killing kids. So these are some of the issues that have pushed young diasporans to become involved. And also we have the issue of the migrants coming, which is causing a lot of civil unrest. Today in Germany we had this incident of a stabbing. We had the incident of shooting, and all these individuals are being seen as diasporans. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us to know, as I said, you know, before, as a matter of interest and as a matter of personal information, for us to know certain signs, telling signs of what to look for in our young diasporans. You know, are they having friends that you've never seen before? Are they reading abnormal literature? Are they having unexpected gifts? You know, how well are they doing in schools? So some of these factors are important. You know, abnormal behavior. And I tell people abnormal behavior depends on that individual that you're dealing with. So if somebody, you know, behaves abnormally, you have to know how he behaves normally in the first place. So it is not a general rule. You know, it is something which you look into depending on the individual himself. Yeah, so I think that's, I'm going to end there. But it's important for each and everyone to understand that what we do as a company is we help organizations, we help governments, you know, to draw up programs to do with, you know, how do you manage, you know, the diaspora communities in terms of, you know, their security awareness? How do you actually manage programs, you know, to run back home? How do you manage programs for individuals and families? Because this is the important level. It is not at the level of the government where this is happening. It happens at the lowest level. So we try as much as possible, and I think, you know, this is going to be an opportunity for us to get in touch with some of the governments who are represented here, South Sudan, you know, to get them to understand, you know, some of the programs that we can provide for them to help their young people, not just here in the UK, but in different countries, in order for them to avoid becoming foreign fighters and homegrown terrorists. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.